Welcome to Dog Day Afternoon, your home for free NBA playoff picks, Major League Baseball picks, and best bets for Friday, May 20th of the year 2022. I'm Gilles Gallant with FTN Bets on a show powered by the FTN Network. I'm joined as always by Daquan Young. Oh, it's on this side. And Quan, I think we need to forget about the props at this rate, man, and just bet on underdogs. Because if you look at last night, the Heat lost. The Panthers and Avalanche and the NHL, they lost as big faves. Even the Yanks, minus 195 favorites last night, they got dropped. So maybe we might not need to start looking at that approach. but I found it funny because obviously we went 1-2 last show. Wiggins comes out and does pretty much Wiggins things, I would say. Not looking overly sharp, but at the same time, he has 15 points at half. I was fully prepared that he was never going to get that next point. He gets it within a minute of third quarter. But somebody DM'd me right after this, and I was like, man, this is a good chirp. I'm going to use this on the show. They were saying you should change the show to Dog Fade Afternoon. And I was like, not bad.
There's some syntax there.
Yeah. Like, again, maybe we'll do a doppelganger show where I just basically fade all the picks as well, kind of thing. But, a lot of bad beats. Wiggins' points is all right, but, Kleber, he got some phantom calls in the second quarter. He barely played. Like, none of the starters played in the fourth quarter of game one, so that was obviously, from a prop standpoint, if you didn't get it, you weren't getting it kind of thing. Yeah. Like Luka, for example, he got one steal. Second quarter, you didn't see him in the second half, right? So, but we've got an awesome guest today, Quan. Sharky Waters Nation is back. He's going to be making his return to the show today, and I'm sure he is sour about how the Heat looked in game two. I really can't wait to hear his thoughts on that and what he thinks about Mavs Warriors for tonight. Now, before we get started with the picks, all my picks today are brought to you by Caesars Sportsbook. And if Caesars is available in your state and you haven't signed up yet, now is the perfect time. Use the code FTNBetsCaesar, the code on the screen, FTNBetsCZR. Caesars will give you an $1,100 free bet just for signing up. And make sure to have multiple sportsbook accounts. So if you only have one, this is a good time to sign up for a second, because prop betting is all about line shopping. And it's something that I do every day to get the best odds. Consistently for me, Caesars has been my go-to for finding the best plus money option. So sign up now with Caesars Sportsbook today. All right, now let's welcome to the show the man, the legend, Sharky Waters Nation. Sharky, welcome back to Dog Day Afternoon.
What's going on, brother? May 20, 2022. Love the intro, talking about dogs. We're not fading the dogs. I think we are buying into the endeavor itself. Just clicked into my channel here, get some people in the door. Gio, it's a pleasure to be here. It's been about 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. We're at the back end of the regular season. We are not in the beginning of the postseason now. This is the Western Conference Finals. I'm hyped to talk about it with you. Lead the way. Let's get into it.
Well, it's funny that we say that like it's been, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. It doesn't feel like that from my perspective because we talk so much off air, and, we've had a couple of Zoom meetings, I guess, with a couple drinks, just shooting the shit and whatever. But either way, I love to have you back on because I want to talk to you about Celtics Heat, specifically game two. Celtics, the line was all over the place. It probably closed at like +3, maybe even +2.5 once Horford got ruled back in, around +140, +150 on the money line. And they ended up covering the entire game, like the first quarter, first half, and full game. And the total as well, that got smashed. That was at 206.5. That got smashed for 229 points. I just wanted to know your perspective on that because I thought your analysis going into game two was sound, very reactive to kind of what we were looking at for game one. And I wanted to know your reaction of how game two played out.
Yeah, well, I'd gone through basically the motivation of Boston and all their other postseason bounce-back games. Of course, people were detailing this all the way back to the regular season where they were, I believe, 10-1 or 11-1 off a loss. They hadn't lost consecutive games since January 30th or something. So, of course, that is very sustainable stuff. But you zoom into the playoffs, it becomes a really unique environment. And we had honed in on basically the desperation of having to bounce back at home or in a game where essentially you can't lose because it's the last game of your season. And I said last night, game two, going home for two games coming up is not a desperation game by any means. You're still on home court neutrality at that point. It proved to be just a complete miss. And I think if you really look at the detailed analysis of why and what happened, it's pretty terrifying stuff when you try to cap a game. When you see Miami up 10 points past the halfway point of the first quarter, and then they lose the first half by 30 points roughly. You know, I was saying, I made a couple of comments, and I'm definitely not a tilt factory. I'm definitely not a guy who doesn't own a loss, but I was absolutely shocked. I was doing a little work. I saw the original score. I did some work for about 25 minutes, came back, and I saw the score was 68-39. And they went on a 60-21 run in 18 minutes. And it's just a snapshot to the NBA as currently constructed, particularly with these young rosters that shoot threes, and they shoot more threes. It's basically the core of their strategy. If they miss, they're going to lose by 15. And if they hit every one, they're going to outscore you by 40 points in 18 minutes. It's terrifying stuff. And Jill, continue on this, because I mean, I get mind blown by it every single time I see it.
And I think you make a good point there about this make or miss aspect, especially with Miami, how strong they looked at home throughout the entire playoffs. And really just historically, Miami's a tough place for teams to win with that defense. And the story of the game was three-point shooting. Like the Celtics went 20 for 40 from three-point range, 50% in game 2, as opposed to 33% in game 1. Jimmy, you know, he didn't go to the line like in game 1, wasn't getting that favorable whistle. I think part of it as well, why he wasn't getting that, is who he's matching up against. He didn't have Peyton Pritchard on him pretty much at every turn. Danny Theus, he didn't have to play as much. They combined for only 29 minutes in game 2, whereas they had to play 50 minutes together in game 1. That's a big defensive drop-off for the Celtics. And I think what we're really seeing here, and this has been kind of what gets brought up every time the Heat lose, is where's the secondary scoring coming from? It's non-existent. Like Jimmy showed up, put up another 29, went over his point total for anybody who took it. But where the hell is Tyler Herro? Like, he's averaging about 13.5 points per game in the playoffs. It's just been too flux for me, like, to trust the Heat on that standpoint. That's why I don't really take a ton of Heat props outside of, you know, me trying to make something happen with PJ Tucker, it seems like. But now PJ, of course, he got hurt as well. That's going to be another depth factor for the Heat going into game 3. And, you know, looking ahead already to game 3, we could talk about what our leans are and what we're thinking for game 3, but already lines are out. You know, Celtics sitting there at 6.5 point home favorites, over under at 207.5. I think it is worth mentioning at the end of March, Miami played in Boston and won 106-98. Celtics closed as 5-point favorites in that game with an over under of 213.5. From a personnel lineup standpoint, really the only difference going into game 3 is we don't know the status of Kyle Lowry, and talking about that secondary scoring. If Kyle Lowry comes back, I could see that line maybe dropping to 6, maybe 5.5. But what are you thinking here when you see that kind of line? Are you thinking that the books are showing more strength for the Celtics being able to return home in game 3 with a potential to take a series lead?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the Celtics have been really hard to cap on the number because of that aforementioned 3-point variance. They're going to play the same type of game, the same pace, the same defensive quality, and they're going to have the same shot quality. Mm-hmm. It's just, will they make them or will they not? So the number at 6 is telling you a good numerical story. The question, again, is basically a coin flip. Are they going to shoot 28% or 48% from 3 over 40-plus shots? And the dynamic of the game is really tough to figure out because, as you mentioned, Miami just got absolutely hammered. I mean, the game was over in early second quarter, and that's not typical of a Miami group coached by Eric Spoelstra, multiple-time NBA champion. And as you mentioned, Jimmy Butler. I said yesterday, you know, I listened to Jimmy Butler in the press conference. Jimmy Butler has turned the corner with his mental game. You know, he was a young guy, moved around a lot, created contracts, this and that. He wants to win. He's an elder statesman in the league. He's the leader of that group without question. They come on the road off that loss. Inherently, just psychologically, you think, okay, this team is going to bounce back. Forget the number, forget anything. Miami's going to play a much better game. And you start to look at what Boston has done in the previous couple rounds in the first home game. Game 1 at home against Brooklyn in the opening round, they did not cover. They walked it off on a Jason Tatum bucket, but didn't cover the spread. Same thing with game 1 in round 2. They hosted Milwaukee at a -4.5, a similar inflated figure, lost the game outright. And an even more specific corollary point, I think, off a road win against Milwaukee in game 4, they came home in game 5 on another inflated figure and lost again. That's probably the closest you can get to what we're coming in here, obviously off a road win coming home. Again, it's tough to cap. You talk about statistical variance and obviously law of averages. When Boston is 1-3 3 ATS in home game 1, all on inflated figures. The only cover coming in game 7 of the last series. Theoretically, at home, they should come up to at least 3-3, which would suggest a continued buy on Boston here. Basically, what I'm starting to say here is this game is very difficult to cap tomorrow. A lot of motivation on Miami. Boston has showcased the inability to cover these spots. But again, law of averages suggests on a continued strong average, they should cover this. I don't know. It's going to be tough.
And I think when you're talking about the variance and also just the fact of the spotlight being only two series, in comparison to where we were looking at the beginning of the playoffs or even closer to the last month of the season, where I felt like yourself really took advantage of what I would consider skewed lines of, taking advantage of Joe Public, who maybe was just betting a lot of favorites in that spot, or even just underdogs in that spot, thinking that of Public Dawg, but the lines just weren't as sharp. So you could maybe take advantage of it here or there. Now you're seeing so much sharp action, and just that's what's for me, I think the biggest thing for game 2, what I was just shocked at is how many points that the Celtics scored. I'm not saying the Celtics that they can't get hot or prominent offensively, but 120 points on this Heat team that was number 1 in defense across the board. You could say the Celtics were the same but if you're just looking at playoff stats in general, the Heat were right there. They were number 1 in opponent field goal percentage, opponent points per game. So to watch them get smacked like that, it kind of, it opened my eyes of possibilities of what we could see with this Celtics offense. But I want to talk about tonight's game, Shark, and talk specifically game 2, Mavericks Warriors. Mavs sitting right now around 6-point underdogs. You get them around plus 210 on the money line if you think they can win game 2 outright. Over under sitting at 214. I think that's a pretty solid number, especially with that 3-point variance. If we're seeing like blowouts where teams are just waving the white flag in the fourth quarter and just thinking about the next game. But game 1 definitely looked like a letdown spot for the Mavs, after a grueling 7-game series with Phoenix. I think that was kind of going into the cap as well between Boston and Miami of going through a 7-game series against Milwaukee, which felt like a championship series just to be exhausted having to go into game 1, and they looked and fell flat. And most of the starters, as I said, in game 1 didn't even play in the fourth quarter. Talk to me about what you saw in game 1 for why you were on the Warriors and why you ended up taking them.
Well, in game 1, I was purely looking at what you suggested, just this huge letdown element off of really was probably the biggest win of Luka Doncic's small window career. And people quickly forget he's only 23 years old, maybe even 22, one of the two. No disrespect to the man. But, you come in here and the guy has the game of a 35-year-old. He's just incredibly well-crafted. He started playing professional basketball in Europe at, I believe, age 13 or 14. So this is a full decade of professionalism. And you think about a 13-year-old kid playing against 25-year-olds. I mean, that takes a very special physical and mental specimen, which he is. That all being said, the Warriors have been a juggernaut at home ATS in the playoffs. 2 isolated non-covers came against Memphis when Memphis had lost John Morant and their backups played. And you and I both know Memphis throughout the campaign was 20-5 ATS without John Morant. They were the best line in the sport. So that's more so on that Memphis group doing what they do without John Morant. It wasn't so much on the Warriors' inability to cover home games. And obviously, you saw what they did in the first game of this series, an absolute blowout from the opening tip. And obviously, the play tonight is also correlated to that. I don't know if you want to jump into that now or take the course on a recap here.
Well, I definitely do. Just hold that thought for a sec, because the one thing I wanted to bring up, and this actually might correlate as well to where you're thinking for game 2. John Ewing with BetMGM. I'm not big into the trends into this, but again, I thought it was just worth noting. Over the last 10 years in the NBA playoffs, teams that lost their previous game by 20 or more are 58, 76, and 1 ATS. So favorites are covering 57% in the following game. And that's per Bet Labs and John Ewing, who tweeted that out. And the Mavs, they lost game 1 by 25. And so we're kind of maybe seeing that a little bit. I mean, that played into the part as well in game 2 against Phoenix as well, where, they didn't look kind of as sharp as they could. And then game 3 and game 4, it was just a buzzsaw of 3-point shooting due to that variance that we keep referring to. All right, well, let's get started with the picks. I'll get us started off here. I'm going to be playing a player prop from this game. And as long as he doesn't get thrown out or something crazy, he should hit this prop. We're going to take Draymond Green over 8.5 rebounds at plus 100. He had 9 rebounds in game 1, Shark, in only 29 minutes played, which I think is pretty impressive because the game was a blowout. He didn't even have to play in the fourth quarter. He's hit this mark in 3 of the last 4 playoff games. He averages just over 9 boards per game, per playoff game in his career. And these matchups that you're seeing with the Warriors and Mavericks, both of these teams don't really sport, traditional centers. So you're going to see a lot more small ball. And they're going to be facing centers like Dwight Powell or Maxi Kleber. Not exactly the prototypical center that you're seeing in the NBA, or maybe you are, with the way that the transition of the NBA is going. But I don't think he should have as much trouble fighting for boards, having to face up against these two. And then also looking at NBAstats.com and just looking at game 1, Draymond had 16 rebound chances in game 1, ended up with 9 in the Memphis series in game 1. So if you include all those as a 7-game series, he averages right around 16 rebound chances per game. So outside of Luka, who is right there with them actually at like 14.5, those two are like by a mile ahead of everybody else in rebounding chances. So with how poorly the Mavs shot in the paint in game 1 as well, and really in the playoffs because they're a 3-point shooting team, I think we got to go back to the Draymond rebounds. So we're going to take him to have 9 or more rebounds tonight at even money, plus 100. That's my first pick for tonight's game.
Yeah, I think it's a solid look, obviously. You said he had, 8 or 9 in the first game, so right on that.
He had 9 in game 1, only played 29 minutes, didn't even have to play the fourth quarter. So
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, you see how Draymond plays. I mean, he's obviously the epicenter of their energy. And I've made the comment for years. I mean, he's essentially a player coach. I talk about Chris Paul being a player coach more from a cerebral standpoint. This guy is not only a physical specimen up and down, he's actually very underrated from his mental makeup standpoint, Draymond Green. He's definitely, in my opinion, going to be a coach in the NBA after his career, and not spoken of nearly enough. I don't dislike the play at all. I'm not particularly versed in player props, so I can't really give any sort of official commentary on that.
Well, my only comment when you say that is him being a coach. Man, he's going to get thrown out a lot. Like, is it possible for a coach to lead the league in technicals? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I definitely think that would be the case with Draymond. Well, let's look at the pick. You posted this a little bit earlier on Twitter, but I want you to elaborate a little bit more about this, about the Mavs and Warriors. We kind of hinted to it a little bit, just talking about how game 1 unfolded. But how do you see Mavs Warriors playing out? What's your best bet for Mavs Warriors tonight?
Yeah, my hat is engaged, May 20, 2022. And what you're looking at here, obviously, the second game of this series, a lot of situational dynamics. A lot of people have fallen in love with the bounce back effect. And I was making a comment yesterday. Go back to our youth. It was the square thing to do was just assume that recent history would repeat itself. And now it's almost become sexier to say that team lost, how they have to bounce back. And I think you have to middle this idea. And when you start to look at the dynamics of the playoffs for both teams, it really does center on a Warriors side here. I've been saying this before I capped game 1. I really correlate the Warriors series here with round 1 against Denver. Denver and Dallas both played the Warriors tough in the regular season, 3-1 straight up and 3-1 ATS.
Right.
And if you look at what the Dubs did in game 1 against Denver, they hammered them. And then they came back on a slightly higher line average in game 2 and hammered them again. And you have to go to Dallas round 2 because that was the only series where Dallas did not have home court advantage at Phoenix. You mentioned it before. Came out flat game 1 against Phoenix, off, of course, a big win against Utah in round 1. People thought Dallas game 2, here we go, bounce back, right? Game 1 was flat, off a series win. Now they're on the road. They're in the same hotel. They get comfortable. No, sir. Blowout loss again. And you go to that series, stay in course with that. The home team in that series, round 2, Phoenix versus Dallas, was 6-0 straight up at home the first 6 games before, of course, a blowout, egregious outlier in game 7. I think this stays the course here. I have nothing against Dallas. I love Dallas. It's a great city. I love Jay Money. He's traveling to Chicago. However, I think the Dallas buy spots begin when they come home, game 3 on Sunday afternoon. And one final point. Dallas had won 9 of 11 against the Warriors dating back 3 seasons. So if we zoom out here in terms of the law of averages, the Warriors theoretically, from a numerical standpoint, should continue to cluster wins and covers to get back to a much more normalized average here. Official play, 1 unit, Warriors -6 on this beautiful Friday afternoon. Gil.
Yeah, this suddenly not so casual Friday, as you like to say. The one thing that I really know, I like the parallel that you brought up about Denver. about having this kind of overwhelming superstar who draws all the attention and basically almost playing dump off to the supporting cast. Because that's kind of the way that the Mavs have been successful. That's pretty much how the Nuggets have played all year. For me, when I see that, that's a great parallel because you're seeing right now where they're able to focus in on Luka to the point, and I don't want to say they're playing him one-on-one, but they're staying out on the shooters to make sure that the drive and kick game is just completely neutralized. And that pretty much leads to what happens, what you saw in game 1 and game 2 against Denver, where, they couldn't keep it within 10 to 15 points. Like maybe they jump out maybe from a race to 20 standpoint, but it was just attrition. Eventually they would just get worn down. I'm going to give you my second pick for this one. And talking about this make or miss aspect of it, this was talking about like game 1. I'm going against what we just talked about where game 1, I bet it didn't hit, but I'm going back to it again because I want to swing for the fences because of the way that this Mavericks team plays. So we're going to take Maxi Kleber for 3 or more 3-pointers made at plus 320. And the reason why we're going back to him is because of how Dwight Powell isn't playing more than 10 to 12 minutes per game at this rate. He just is not suited for this matchup. Really just, it's difficult to play him in the playoffs. So Kleber, this is kind of, you're banking on him almost as like to not get into foul trouble. Because if he doesn't get into foul trouble, he's going to take 7 or 8 3-point shots in this game. And he's right now, he's shooting 49% from 3-point range in the playoffs. That's first on the team. He has hit 3 or more in 4 playoff games. 3 of those were on the road. Again, another factor that I always like to look at is shot splits. You can't hit a 3-point prop if he's not going to take 3-point shots. All of his shots, 75% of them come from 3-point range, and he's averaging just under 5 per game. And of course, we've talked about the Mavs. They live and die by the 3. They take the most attempts as a team in the playoffs. And game 1 kind of went against script where the Warriors' perimeter defense, like coming into this series, pretty shaky. They ranked 3rd in opponent 3-point percentage during the regular season, but that increased to 36.3% in the postseason. And when I was looking at comparisons of like where 36.3% would rank in the grand scheme of a season, that was actually bottom 5 in the NBA during the regular season if that was the average. So just a little bit shaky for me. So that was why I was going with Kleber to maybe have a little bit more of an impact, similar to what he did in game 2 against the Suns when he hit 5 threes on them, even though the Mavs ended up losing that game.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. I like the buy low element of it. I think, that's also centering around the total in game 1, obviously very low, 112 to 87. I think you're going to see more points here tonight. I do think the Mavs will make some adjustments. I don't know how much adjustment they can make if the Warriors do commit to the closeout. And again, you make the comment, regular season basketball oftentimes, and I'll be the first to admit this, I cross-reference the regular season a little bit too much with the postseason. It really is a completely different environment. And these teams will just play one style of ball for 6.5 months. And then they'll come into the postseason and be a completely different team. And, obviously Klay Thompson didn't come back in the rotation until halfway or later in the season. Draymond Green was out in the back end of the season for a period of time. Steph Curry also injured. So this is really the first time we've seen this group together for a concrete period of time, also with peak motivation. And you saw in game 1, their closeouts were incredible. Draymond Green was in the postgame with Shaq and the boys outside the stadium. The stadium was raucous, and they were talking about that. They were talking about basically game 7 defense. And I think with that, as you mentioned, Maxi Kleber at plus 320, it's going to come down to the closeouts. Are these guys going to rotate and be a hand in their face, or are you going to be getting wide open threes? And when you saw Dallas clean up the 3-ball against Phoenix, Phoenix was unable to get to the perimeter and get their rotations and their closeouts. I don't mind the play at all. I think it's actually a real solid look. I think he needs to shoot the ball better if Dallas can be competitive. And I do expect more points in this game as well tonight.
One thing I wanted to ask you about this game, and you and Jay are, I don't want to say famous, but definitely I have watched you guys put in great work and results on where you're taking the staggered bets, where you like to take, a full blowout from the start, first quarter, first half, full game. You have the full game at -6. What do you have any trepidation if anybody was to ask you about a first half line? First half, I think, is at -3 right now, or even a first quarter line, for this at like -2. Do you think that there could be some, rollover effect, especially with some people who are commenting, like Luka, for example, apparently up all night sick, that this could be just maybe a front to back blowout perspective? And do you see any value in maybe looking at first quarter and first half as well?
Yeah, I think one point on that, it's really hard to listen to a story like that about a guy being sick and understanding if it's valid or not. And, I don't want to walk on this life of a mistrust of everybody because I want to trust people, right? I think people have good general.
No, Al Horford is why we have trust issues. Jimmy Butler in Game 6 is why we have trust issues, right? Like Paul George in the playoff game or the one-off game, that's trust issues. That's the reason why we're in this position where we hear this shit and we're like, you know what? What's noise? What isn't? So yeah, continue. Sorry.
Without question. No apology needed. But, without question, this has been obviously 2 years, COVID being a thing. But then outside of COVID, the late injuries that have nothing to do with it, where these guys just, as you mentioned, Paul George in the playing game, last game of the season, and he sits out and they lose to the Pelicans. Same thing with Jimmy Butler in the clinching game. And it's just a totally different league we're in right now. And as you mentioned, this Luka thing, I just don't know if I can trust it. And therefore, I can't cap it as a point of reference in terms of an early buy or fade. First quarter or first half bets, historically over the course of my career, which is 10 plus years, are just situational buys and fades. And they're much better in the regular season, of course, because you do get 82 games. You get to see teams where the best spots really are like off a road trip. They come home in the first half. It's a great fade, stuff like that. In the playoffs, it's definitely there. But I think it's more so coming from road to home where you will see that early jolt because of the crowd. And you saw in Game 3 against Phoenix, it was a matinee. And I mentioned this. It was a weird time for Phoenix. It was like 1 o'clock in their body time. But regardless of that, the Dallas crowd really juiced them up in the first quarter. And that was the game that Dorian Finney-Smith, I believe, finished 8 for 11 for three-point range.
He did. 24 points, all from threes.
And it was right from the beginning, too. It was just an onslaught. And that's where the first quarter, first half can be a really good look. But it is more so situationally dependent on coming, I think, road to home.
So with that in mind, we didn't talk about this at all when we were looking at Game 3 between the Heat and Celtics. Obviously, you haven't posted or put any bets out there for that yet. But right now, looking just early, first quarter, Celtics are sitting there at -2. First half is -3. They're up to 6.5 now for a full game. Do you think that could maybe play into a little bit of a storyline here? And again, I find it very difficult to fade this Heat team just because of the defense. But, man, that Game 2, I try not to get caught up in recency bias. But, again, even that second quarter in Game 1 gave me a little bit of pause because you needed that ridiculous game or a third quarter from the Heat to essentially bring that game back to the horizon. So I'm just wondering if maybe for Game 3, do you think that might be something along your playing line, like where you're thinking maybe Celtics first quarter, first half, full game, and just thinking of a full-on Celtics onslaught?
It's hard to figure out because, again, one of the things that's tough about this series is we haven't seen these teams in this position yet. We haven't seen Miami off a home loss going on the road. In the previous 2 series in Game 3, they were up 2-0. And they did go 0-2 ATS in those spots. But again, when you're up 2-0, that's the massive desperation spot for the Hawks and the Sixers. And I did have both of those plays. I had the Hawks in Game 3 and the Sixers in Game 3 as well. But, of course, now when the Celtics steal home court, Miami has much more incentive to play a great road game. The narrative for me here is definitely on Miami. In terms of the quarters and the halves, the numerical splits, as you said, obviously when you see 2.5 in the first quarter and the game's only 6.5, that should be 10. It's probability weighting, line averaging, suggesting a home first quarter. That doesn't always tell you a great story. It's more of a historical expectancy. And, of course, that can be difficult when you're zoomed into one matchup, which is much more of an emotional, psychological thing for the Miami Heat. The Heat need to come out here and set the tone. And Boston has been situationally lackluster in the first quarter at home. One of the things that I hate in capping, really, is when the number is weighted in one direction and then the narrative is on the other side. So if I'm on Miami, they're +2.5, I'm on the wrong side of the number because the weighting of the number is on the favorite. And you will see this where like a -6 favorite will only be laying 1 in the first quarter. So that's a short split, which is leaning the other direction of the dog. So they're telling you a Boston story with a number. And again, I always say this, the books, the algorithms, they know more than me. I'm willing to listen. It's led me down a great path in sports betting for a decade now. It's not going anywhere. When you listen to the books' numbers, it'll tell you a great story. Trying to fade their numbers is just going to get you in trouble. But in the playoffs, in these one-offs, it's kind of like the Super Bowl every single game. Anything can happen at any point in the game. It's just tough to cap.
Well, I think the one thing too, Shark, then if you're looking at that first quarter, first half, full game opportunity, then by this logic, then we should be looking if this plays out the way that we think, where the Warriors win by 6 or more or 7 or more and cover, there's very likely going to be a spot where the Mavs are only maybe 2.5-point home favorites for a full game. But what I could see happening is they're 2.5 points full game, but still -2 for the first quarter. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, where they're saying that the Mavericks are going to come out firing, but then they're going to say that the Warriors might be able to keep it close and maybe make a little second half run. So just kind of keep that in mind when you see the line coming out here for game 3 after tonight, because it's going to come out probably an hour pretty much after this game concludes tonight. And you'll be able to see what that story is telling you. We're going to finish up here. I'm going to give out my final pick for today. This is considered my alpha pick, which is considered my favorite pick of the night. And we're going to be sticking with the 3-point theme with the Mavericks. I don't really expect the Mavs to change what they do because this is how they got there, and that's by raining threes. And we're going to take Reggie Bullock. We're taking him to have 3 or more three-pointers tonight at +110. And of the 4 remaining playoff teams, Bullock, of all the players, is 6th overall in any player that's left in the playoffs in three-point attempts, 7.4 attempts per game. He's just under 3 makes per game. That's also ranked 6th. And just like Kleber, it's the shot splits that draw me in. It's funny when you look at Bullock's stats. 116 shots in the playoffs, Shark, 101 of them from three-point range. He clearly only takes one type of shot, and that's a three-point shot. And the Warriors defense, as I mentioned when talking about Kleber, a little suspect in the playoffs. Over 50% of all the three-point makes that they allow actually come from opposing guards. And Bullock, I never would have thought of him this way, but especially coming off of, being with Detroit and, with the Knicks for a stint, he leads the team in minutes played, 39.1 minutes per game. Like, you would think that would be, closer to Luka or, Dorian Finney-Smith. No, it's Reggie Bullock who's been playing, and he's picking up Steph Curry full court with how much he's on the floor, his shot splits, the volume alone. I got to ride with Bullock again, man. He's taken like 80% of all of his shots come from three-point range. He had 3 in game 1. So we're going to take Bullock again, over 2.5 three-pointers made, +110.
Yeah, I like it. And as you mentioned, Bullock has really found a career niche here. I mean, he was kind of a journeyman to a certain degree, but that 3 and D is a real thing. I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, he's shooting 80% of his shots from 3. That's what he does. He hangs out on the perimeter, Luka, drive and dish. And the defensive quality of this guy is very impressive. He's very long. I don't have his wingspan statistics in front of me, but he is very long. You get him on the perimeter, also a snapshot to his fitness level. This guy has trained very well in the offseason. So he's obviously playing a great brand of basketball, and he's put himself in a great position in his career. I wouldn't disagree with the play here at all.
Well, it's funny that as a Knicks fan, is it conflicting for you to watch Bullock and Ntilikina end up getting a ton of run in this series, but couldn't do it in New York?
Not really, because, I mean, those Knicks contracts were more so just one-offs to, move cap space and whatnot. I mean, the Knicks. The Knicks are constantly in flux trying to figure it out. They never really do figure it out. But those contracts were definitely just come in, hang out for a year, and then get the hell out so we can move these young guys around.
And that was me just kind of sticking it to you. Not really sticking it. I mean, really, what else is there to say? I don't really have to say much about the Knicks for them to get a little bit of a laugh. But at the same time, I don't want to kick a horse while it's down. You know what I mean? They're going to bounce back next year. Hopefully Julius Randle gets his head right. And, they could be a contender in the East, because the East, that's the one thing that's tough now is the East. I don't want to say that the strength is now in the Eastern Conference, but I would definitely say the top end, at least the 1 through 6, you could argue the 1 through 6 in the East is probably stronger than the 1 through 6 in the West. But again, it's apples and oranges. You can debate that all you want. So those are our picks. You've got Warriors -6 tonight to cover the full game. I've got Bullock 3s, Kleber 3s, and we're going to take Draymond to have 9 or more rebounds. So that's all for today. 3 picks from me. We've got a pick from Shark, a little bit of a lean as well for game 3 between Celtics and Heat. Before we go, though, Shark, can you tell the folks at home more about where we can find your work, the shows that you've got, what you got coming up, more about the show that you do with J Money as well?
Absolutely. Sharky Waters Nation, 9 words of lifestyle right away to water. That came to my mind about 4.5 years ago. Don't ask me why. Everything I do is very much organic thought. And my organic thought is one real thing. I want to create powerful people in this life. We're not taught this from the get in our life. We're kind of taught to over-compete with each other and drive each other nuts. I don't like that at all. I want people to take control of their life, feel great, and consequently dominate sports betting with us. It is NBA. It is NBA Talk with Jay Money, NBA Payday every day at 5 o'clock on YouTube. We do college basketball, college football. I do like hockey. Shout out to you guys in Canada for the hockey picks, but it's mostly basketball and football, and it's just a beautiful blessing to be here. Jill, thank you for hosting me. FTN Bets, thank you guys for putting on a great show every day. Beautiful Friday, Jill.
Well, I was going to ask you, man, don't you also have you got a college football betting show as well with our guy Guns Picks, right? That's going to be starting this fall again too?
Yeah. College football Fridays, 9 o'clock. The Shark and the Gun, and we're bringing in our man Lock of Gibraltar. We call him Lock of the Rock.
Nice.
And so it'll be a three-way fire, 20, 25 minutes. We try to go super fast because we know people don't have a ton of time in their life, and we're trying to bring you the sharpest stuff in the most usable, quick, efficient format. So that'll be in the fall. And, of course, this summer is going to go quickly, but it doesn't need to go too quickly. I think you and I both discussed this. We work really hard for 8-9 months of the year, and that is including Saturdays and Sundays. So it's going to be nice when the NBA ends, take a little break, get outside, do a lot of stuff we don't get to do on a normal time. But this fall will be incredible, incredible stuff. And Joe, I can't wait to collaborate further.
Well, one of the things before we go, I just wanted to add to what you were talking about empowering people and, getting the positivity out there, because that's one of the things that drew me into you initially. Like when we were, just engaging on social media, whatever else, is just like, man, like this stuff gets me hyped up. And I think the one thing that I was trying to, or I would like to reiterate to people is you can win as many bets as you want and the money is there and it's important. But if you don't have your mentals right outside of this space, it's all for naught, man. And I'm guilty of this as well. Like, had some lower points throughout the year of just, trying not to let like your betting results like influence kind of your happiness. But at the same time, don't let the sports betting world kind of dictate your happiness in the real world. And I think we both have talked about this for hours, just talking about ways that people can, improve their life, but also have fun while they're doing it. And I think that's the other thing too, is that sometimes in sports betting, maybe gets a little too serious sometimes. And I think sometimes people just need to take a step back and realize that, there is still a way to do this recreationally while also making a little bit of money off to the side and also feeling positive and empowering other people to be positive as well. So again, kudos to you, man, for doing that and continue to do that, because that's, I think, the key to your success. And before we go, I just want to say we'll be back on Wednesday on FTN Network, another special guest and more picks. Follow me on Twitter at GDawg5000. Make sure to follow my man Sharky here at Sharks and Sports. I want to thank everybody for watching Dog Day Afternoon. Bon chance.